Alexander the Great. After Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, came out of the land of Kittim and conquered Macedonia, and defeated Darius the king of the Persians and the Medes, and reigned in his place. He was already king of Greece. He then fought numerous wars, conquered fortresses, and slaughtered the kings of the earth. He went to the ends of the earth and took the spoils of many nations. So the earth rested from war before him, and he was exalted, his heart was likewise encouraged. He formed a mighty army and ruled countries, nations, and princes, and they all paid taxes to him. Then later, he fell sick, and he knew he was dying. So he brought in his trusted servants, who had grown up with him from childhood, and parceled out his kingdom to them while he was still living. After Alexander reigned for 12 years, death claimed him. Then his servants began to rule, each in his appointed place. They all put on crowns after he died, and their sons for many years after them, and the evils they caused multiplied on the earth. Antiochus Epiphanes and the lawless Jews. A sinful root came forth from them, Antiochus Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus the king, who was a hostage in Rome. He began his reign in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days lawless men came forth from the sons of Israel, and they persuaded many, saying, "Let us make a covenant with the Gentiles surrounding us, for ever since we were separated from them, many evils have found us." This proposal found favor in their eyes, and some of the people eagerly desired to enter into this agreement. So they went to the king, and he gave them authority to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. Then they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the Gentiles, and made themselves as the uncircumcision. So they fell away from the holy covenant, yoked themselves to the Gentiles, and sold themselves to do evil. Antiochus conquers Egypt. Thus the kingdom was prepared before Antiochus, and he determined he would reign over the land of Egypt, so as to rule over 2 kingdoms. Thus he entered Egypt with a strong multitude of chariots, elephants, cavalrymen, and a large army. He engaged Ptolemy, king of Egypt, in battle, and Ptolemy turned from him in shame and fled. Many were wounded and fell. So they captured mighty cities in Egypt, and Antiochus took spoils in the land of Egypt. Antiochus pillages the temple. After he conquered Egypt in the 143rd year, Antiochus turned and went up to Israel and Jerusalem with a large army. He entered the sanctuary in arrogance, and took the golden altar, the lampstand, all the utensils, the table of presentation, the cups and bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, and the golden ornaments on the face of the temple. He stripped everything, and took the silver and the gold and everything costly, and the hidden treasures he found. Taking all these things, he departed for his own land. He committed deeds of murder and spoke with great arrogance. There was great mourning everywhere in Israel. Rulers and elders groaned. Virgins and young men grew weak. And the beauty of the women was altered. Every bridegroom took up a lament, and sat mourning in his bridal chamber. The land was shaken for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. More destruction in Jerusalem. After 2 years, the king sent a revenue official to the cities of Judah, and he entered Jerusalem with a large army. Antiochus spoke peaceable words to them with deceit, and they believed him. Then he fell upon the city suddenly, struck it a great blow, and killed many people from Israel. He took spoils from the city, set it on fire, and tore down its houses and the city walls. They took captive the women and the children and took possession of the animals. Then they built the city of David with a great and strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. They placed there a sinful nation of lawless men, and they became strong within it. And they laid up weapons and provisions, and gathered together the spoils they had taken from Jerusalem. Then they returned there and were like a great snare. It became an ambush against the sanctuary, an evil accuser against Israel continually. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary, and defiled the sanctuary. The inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. And she became a dwelling place of strangers. She became a stranger to her offspring. And her children forsook her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a desert. And her feasts were turned into mourning. Her Sabbaths into a disgrace. And her honor into contempt. Her dishonor prevailed against her glory. And her high position was turned into mourning. A decree of corruption. Then the king wrote to all his kingdom, that they all were to be as one people. And that each one was to forsake his customs. So all the nations accepted the word of the king. Many from Israel also thought it good to serve him, so they sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Then the king sent books to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah by the hand of messengers, and told them to follow foreign customs in the land, to forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and the feasts, and to defile the sanctuary and the holy ones. These books also told them to build altars, sacred precincts, and temples to idols, to sacrifice swine and common animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised, so they would corrupt their souls by every unclean and profane thing, and forget the law and alter all the ordinances. They also added that whoever did not obey the word of the king would die. According to all these words he wrote to everyone in his kingdom. He also placed inspectors over all the people and commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice in each and every city. Thus many of the people, everyone who forsook the law, joined together and did evil things in the land. They forced Israel to hide in every place of refuge they had. Then on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation on the altar of the whole burnt offerings and built altars in the surrounding cities of Judah. They also burned incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. And when they found books of the law, they tore them to pieces and burned them in the fire. Whenever a book of the covenant was found in someone's possession, or if anyone sympathized with the law, the judgment of the king was to kill him. They acted with their might against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the cities. Then on the 25th day of the month they sacrificed on the altar, which was on top of the altar of the whole burnt offerings. In keeping with the decree, they sentenced to death the women who had their children circumcised, and the families who had circumcised them, and hung the infants from their mothers' necks. Yet many in Israel grew strong, and determined in themselves not to eat unclean things. They chose rather to die than be defiled by foods or profane the holy covenant. So they died, and great wrath came upon Israel. Notes from the previous pages. 1:1 Alexander is Alexander the Great. 1:8-9 According to the historian Josephus, Alexander's generals divided his empire into several dynastic houses: Ptolemy in Egypt, Seleucus in Babylon, Lysimachus in Hellespont, Cassander in Macedonia, and Antigonus in Asia. 1:11-15 Those sons of Israel who wanted to introduce Greek culture into Jewish life were called Hellenists. They sought to overthrow the legitimate high priest Onias III and succeeded in having one of their own, Onias' brother Jason, appointed high priest by Antiochus IV, 2 Maccabees 4. Jason built a gymnasium where young Jews competed alongside the Greeks. Many Jewish men underwent painful operations to hide their circumcision. 1:16-19 Antiochus IV campaigned against Ptolemy IV, reigned 180 to 145 BC, in Egypt. From 170 to 168 BC. 1:20-24 Antiochus entered Jerusalem, pillaging the temple to pay his war debts. 1:29-35 Apollonius the Misarch, a commander of Mysian mercenaries, erected a citadel. v33, known as the Acra, literally Acropolis, on the Temple Mount, just north of the temple itself, where he installed a Phrygian named Philip as governor, Josephus. 1:41-53 Antiochus the king abandoned his dream of rebuilding Alexander's kingdom for the more modest goal of consolidating his own empire. He decreed that the Jews were to abandon their religion, v42, because it was considered politically disruptive. Any Jew who refused to sacrifice to the Greek gods on behalf of the emperor, verses 44-49, was tortured and killed, v50. 154 Inside the temple, Antiochus erected the abomination of desolation, Dan 9:27. Either a statue of Zeus sculpted in the likeness of the emperor or some cultic stones. Until that time, the temple had been the focal point of the Jewish nation and faith. Jews made 3 pilgrimages there each year, at the feasts of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. The zeal of Mattathias. In those days Mattathias, the son of John of the tribe of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Jorib, rose up from Jerusalem and settled in Modin. He had 5 sons, John, called Guddi, Simon, called Thassi, Judas, called Maccabeus, Eleazar, called Avaran, and Jonathan, called Aphus. He saw the blasphemies taking place in Judah and Jerusalem, and said, Alas, why was I born to see this? The ruin of my people, the destruction of the holy city, and to live there when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, the sanctuary into the hand of foreigners. Her temple has become like a man without honor. Her glorious vessels were carried away into captivity. Her infants have been slain in the streets. Her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation has not inherited her palaces, and taken hold of her spoils? All her adornment has been removed. In place of freedom, she has become a slave. And behold, our sanctuary, our beauty and our glory have been laid waste. And the Gentiles have desecrated it. Why should we live any longer? Thus Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned exceedingly. Apostasy at Modin. Now those from the king who were enforcing the apostasy journeyed to the city of Modin to make them offer sacrifice. And many from Israel also came with them. So Mattathias and his sons gathered together. Then those from the king spoke to Mattathias, saying, You are a great and glorious leader in the city and supported by your sons and brothers. Now come, be the first to follow the decree of the king, as all the Gentiles and the men of Judah have done, and those who remain in Jerusalem, and you and your sons will be among the king's friends, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. Then Mattathias answered, speaking with a loud voice, Though all the Gentiles in the house of the kingdom of the king obey him, and each turns from the worship of their fathers, and chooses to follow his commands, my sons and my brothers and I will continue in the covenant of our fathers. Far be it from us to forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the words of the king to turn aside from our worship to the right or to the left. When he finished saying these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of everyone to sacrifice upon the altar in Modin in accordance with the king's decree. When Mattathias saw him, he was filled with zeal, and his heart trembled and poured forth anger in judgment. Then he ran and slew him upon the altar. So he killed the king's man who wanted to offer sacrifice at that time, and he tore down the altar. Thus he had zeal for the law, just as Phinehas had against Zambri the son of Salome. Warfare in the wilderness. Then Mattathias cried out with a loud voice in the city, saying, Every one who has zeal for the law and holds to the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains and left behind whatever they had in the city. Then many who sought righteousness and judgment went down to the desert to live. There, they, their sons, their women, and their cattle, because evils increased severely against them. It was also announced to the king's men and the soldiers in Jerusalem, the city of David, that certain men who had scattered when the command of the king was made known had gone into hiding in the desert. Thus, many ran after them, tracked them down, marched against them, and engaged them in battle on the Sabbath day. Then they said to them, Now, come out and do the will of the king and you shall live. But they answered, We will not come out, nor will we do the will of the king to desecrate the Sabbath day. So the enemy rushed into battle against them. Yet they did not answer them, nor did they cast a stone, nor did they block up their hiding places, saying, Let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth will testify for us that you destroyed us unjustly. So the king's men rose against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they died along with their women, children, and cattle, as many as 1,000 people. Then Mattathias and his friends grieved for them exceedingly. So each one said to his neighbor, If we do as our brothers did and fail to fight against the Gentiles for our life and our ordinances, they will quickly wipe us off the earth. So they resolved on that day, saying, Every man who comes against us for battle on the Sabbath day, let us war against him, and we shall not all die as our brothers did in their hiding places. Then the synagogue of the Hasidians gathered with them, a mighty army from Israel. Everyone who willingly offered himself for the law, everyone who escaped from evils was added to them and became their support. So they formed an army, and struck the sinners in their wrath and the lawless men in their anger. The rest fled to the Gentiles to be rescued. Mattathias and his allies also surrounded the altars and tore them down, and they circumcised the uncircumcised boys by force, as many as they found in the mountains of Israel. Thus they pursued the sons of arrogance, and the undertaking prospered in their hand. They took the law out of the hand of the Gentiles and the kings, and did not allow the sinners to dominate them. Last days of Mattathias. Then the days approached for Mattathias to die, and he spoke to his sons, saying, Now arrogance and scorn and the time of destruction and furious anger have been strengthened. Therefore, children, be zealous for the law, and offer your lives for the covenant of our fathers, and remember the deeds our fathers did in their generations, and receive great honor and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in trial, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness? And Joseph at the time of his trouble kept the commandment and became ruler of Egypt. Phinehas our father showed true zeal and received a covenant of eternal priesthood. Joshua fulfilled the word and became a judge in Israel. Caleb testified in the assembly and received an inheritance in the land. David, in the mercy shown him, inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. In his great zeal for the law, Elijah was taken up into heaven. Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael believed and were saved from the fiery furnace. In his innocence, Daniel was delivered from the mouth of lions. Thus, understand from generation to generation that all who hope in the Lord will not be weak. Do not fear the words of a sinful man, because his glory is like manure and worms. Today he will be exalted, but tomorrow he will not be found, for he returned to his dust, and his purpose will perish. Children, be courageous and strong in the law, because you will be honored by it. So behold Simeon, your brother. I know he is a man of wisdom. Listen to him every day. And he shall be your father. Judas Maccabeus, mighty in fighting from his youth, he shall be the leader of your army, and he will fight the fight of the people. And you, bring forth with you all those who are doers of the law, and seek justice for your people. Repay the Gentiles in full, and hold fast to the ordinance of the law. Then he blessed them and was added to his fathers. So he died in the 146th year and was buried in the tomb of his fathers in Modin, and all of Israel mourned him with great mourning. Notes from the previous page. 1:62-64 Unclean food involved the sacrifice of swine to Zeus. Josephus the historian notes that while the Jews were being persecuted, their Samaritan neighbors lied to Antiochus, calling themselves a colony of Medes and Persians, not Jews. He reports they even went so far as to have their temple on Mount Gerizim dedicated to Jupiter. Helleneus 2:1-5 Mattathias of the house of Hashman fled the Hellenizing evils of Jerusalem with his 5 sons, later known as the Hasmoneans. They moved to Modin, a rural town 17 miles northwest of Jerusalem. It was common for Jews of the time to have both a Jewish and a Greek name. Judas was also called Maccabeus, hence the family was called the Maccabees. 2:15-18 The king's officers sought to induce Mattathias to sacrifice first. They reasoned that the others from Israel would surely follow his lead. 2:24-26 Elsewhere in Israel, Jews had either been compliant or faced death willingly. 1:63 So it is very possible Mattathias and his allies surprised and overcame a small troop of Antiochus soldiers. Their sense of security as an occupying force may have made them careless, and they certainly did not expect a rebellion from the docile Jews. 2:27-28 Mattathias and his sons fled to a retreat in the Gophna Mountains, located in southern Samaria. In this way, they avoided the jurisdiction of the Seleucid commander of Judea and could remain unmolested for a time. 2:30-38 It was forbidden for Jews to fight on the Sabbath, Exodus 31:12-18, and Antiochus soldiers took full advantage of this fact, v. 38. 2:39-41 Mattathias and the Jews realized they would be slaughtered if they chose not to defend themselves on the Sabbath. In a truly radical statement for their day, the Maccabees foreshadowed Jesus' words, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath," Mark 2:27. 2:42-48 The Hasidians were Jews who strictly upheld the law. Together with Mattathias they began cleansing Israel of impurity, attacking both Gentiles and Jewish traders.